He thought the mission was over, until his dog brought back something that should have burned years ago, a single torn message, written by a man he personally confirmed was dead. The deeper he looked, the more the truth began to shift, and none of it matched what he remembered. But the most terrifying part wasn't the secret buried in the mission. It was realizing he had made a choice he no longer wanted to remember, and the only one who never forgot was the dog standing beside him. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe to support more stories like this. Morning in northern Montana did not arrive with warmth. It arrived with light. A pale, silver light spilled across the frozen lake like something ancient and patient, something that had been watching long before men built cabins along its edge. The surface of the ice held the sky in perfect stillness, as if the world had paused mid-breath. Brennan Voss stood at the edge of that silence. At 41, he carried himself like a man who had forgotten how to be anything but ready. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with a lean, hardened build shaped by years of discipline rather than vanity. No wasted motion, no unnecessary strength. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, slightly longer than regulation, as if he had allowed himself that one quiet rebellion. His face was clean-shaven, revealing a square jaw and pronounced cheekbones sharpened by the northern cold. His skin, once lighter, had been weathered by wind and years spent outdoors. But it was his eyes that unsettled people. Gray-blue, steady, and always searching, as if they expected something to break through the quiet at any moment. He had lived by this lake for 3 years, 3 winters, 3 years of convincing himself that stillness was the same thing as peace. Behind him, the cabin creaked softly in the cold, old wood adjusting to another frozen morning. Inside, the smell of burned cedar lingered in the air. And beside him, Kyle. The German shepherd stood slightly behind Brennan's right leg, not touching, but close enough to move if needed. 4, maybe 5 years old. His coat was a deep mix of black and tan, thickened for winter but rougher than most, less groomed, more lived in. One ear held a small nick at the edge, a scar that had healed unevenly. Cale didn't look at the lake. He looked at Brennan. Not with affection, not exactly, with attention. The kind that didn't ask for permission. Brennan exhaled slowly, watching the mist fade from his breath. "Nothing out there," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. Cale didn't move. That was the thing about Cale. He never moved unless it mattered. The day unfolded like most others. Repair work in the shed. The rhythmic scrape of sandpaper against old wood. The smell of oil and lake water soaked into planks that had seen better years. Brennan worked alone, sleeves rolled just enough to expose wrists marked faintly by old scars. Thin, pale lines that spoke of precision rather than chaos. He didn't think much while he worked. That was the point. Thinking was where things went wrong. Around midday, Kyle disappeared. That wasn't unusual. The dog had his own routes, his own patterns, loops through the tree line, checks along the shoreline. Brennan never asked where he went. He trusted that Kyle would come back. He always did. But today, he came back different. Brennan heard the door before he saw him. A low push, wood scraping against packed snow. He didn't look up immediately. "Back already?" he said absently. No answer, of course. Just silence. And then, something else. A soft, deliberate step. Brennan looked up. Kyle stood in the doorway, snow dusting his back, breath steady, and in his mouth, a piece of paper. Burned. Not charred completely. Not reduced to ash. Just burned enough to matter. Brennan frowned, setting the sandpaper aside. "What is that?" Kyle stepped forward but didn't approach all the way. He placed the paper on the floor between them, carefully, almost precisely, then stepped back, not offering it, presenting it. Brennan felt something tighten in his chest, though he didn't yet know why. He crouched, picking up the paper. The edges were blackened, brittle. The center still held shape, ink smudged but legible in places. It smelled faintly of smoke, not fresh, but not old enough to have faded either. "Just trash," Brennan muttered. Kale didn't react, didn't blink, didn't look away. Brennan stood, walked to the stove, and without hesitation, dropped the paper into the fire. The flames caught quickly, curling the edges inward. "Not everything needs a reason," he said, quieter now. Behind him, a sudden movement. Fast. Kale lunged. Not aggressive, not wild. Precise. His jaws snapped just inside the edge of the firebox, pulling the paper back out before it could fully catch. A few sparks scattered across the floor as he stepped back, placing the half-burning sheet down again. The room went still. Brennan turned slowly. "What are you doing?" Kale didn't retreat this time. He stood over the paper, head slightly lowered, not submissive, not dominant, insistent. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Brennan stepped forward again, slower now. He picked up the paper. The fire had eaten more of it, but not all. There were words, not many, but enough. "If you're reading this, then you forgot again." The world did not shatter. There was no sudden rush of sound, no dramatic shift in light. Just a small, precise fracture inside Brennan's chest. He stared at the handwriting, at the way certain letters curved, at the spacing, tight, controlled, familiar, too familiar. "No," he said under his breath. Kyle shifted slightly, but didn't interrupt. Brennan turned the paper, as if another angle might change what he was seeing. It didn't. His fingers tightened. "That's not..." He exhaled sharply. "It's not possible." Because he knew that handwriting, not in a vague, distant way. He knew it the way you know your own name written by someone who had written it 100 times before. Silas Creed. The name came without permission, without warning, and with it, a memory. Snow. Gunfire. A voice shouting something Brennan couldn't quite hear anymore. And then silence. A report filed. A confirmation signed. A man declared dead. By Brennan himself. He let the paper fall onto the table. "It's nothing," he said, louder now, as if volume could make it true. "Just coincidence. Someone copying something. Old paper, wrong place." Kale's gaze didn't change. Brennan ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the small room. "People leave things," he continued. "Paper blows. Fires happen. You pick something up, bring it back. Doesn't mean anything." Kyle took a step toward the door, paused, looked back, then looked toward the lake, a quiet, unmistakable direction. Brennan followed the movement, his jaw tightening. No. Kyle didn't move. Brennan shook his head. We're not doing that. Silence. The kind that presses against your ears. You hear me? Brennan added, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to anymore. It's just a piece of paper. Kyle waited. Not disobedient, not impatient. Just waiting. As if the decision didn't belong to him. Brennan looked at the lake through the frost-lined window. It was the same as it had been that morning. Still. Empty. Safe. That's what he had built here. A place where nothing reached him. Where the past stayed where it was supposed to. Dead. He turned back to the table. The paper lay there, edges curled, words incomplete. You forgot again. His chest tightened once more, but this time he pushed it down. Hard. No, he said, quieter now. He grabbed his jacket, pulling it on, not to go out, but to cover the sudden cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Kyle remained by the door, watching, waiting. Brennan met his eyes for a long moment, then looked away. We're staying, he said. Not angry, not uncertain. Final. Kyle didn't argue. Didn't move toward the lake again. He simply lowered himself to the floor beside the door, resting his head on his paws, still facing outward. Still ready. Brennan turned his back to him, to the door, to the lake, to the thing that wouldn't burn, and for the first time since coming to this place, he made a choice, not to follow. The lake did not change. That was the problem. 3 mornings passed, and it remained exactly the same. Flat, pale, unbroken. The kind of stillness that didn't invite questions, but made them heavier when they came anyway. Brennan Voss tried to return to routine. He woke before sunrise. He checked the stove. He worked in the shed. He sanded, repaired, adjusted. The same motions, repeated until they lost meaning. But something had shifted. Not outside. Inside. It was subtle at first. A delay in movement. A hesitation before each decision. Like a man who suddenly realized the ground beneath him might not be as solid as he believed. And Kyle did not insist. That was what made it worse. The German shepherd no longer paced by the door or nudged Brennan toward the lake. He didn't whine, didn't pull, didn't demand. He simply waited. Every morning, he stood near the entrance, ears forward, body still, eyes fixed in the same direction. Toward the lake. Toward something Brennan refused to name. On the 4th day, Brennan stopped sanding mid-motion. The sound of wood against paper had begun to irritate him. Not physically, mentally. Each scrape felt like it was removing something more than just the surface. He set the tool down. The silence rushed in. Kyle lifted his head slightly. Not hopeful. Just aware. Brennan stared at the doorway, jaw tightening. You're not going to stop, he muttered. Kyle blinked once. That was enough. Brennan grabbed his jacket. The cold hit harder than usual. Or maybe Brennan just felt it more. Snow crunched under his boots as he walked toward the lake. Each step deliberate but slower than it should have been. Not because he was unsure where to go, but because he was sure he didn't want to be there. Kale moved ahead this time. Not fast. Measured. He didn't look back often, just enough to confirm Brennan was still following. The lake stretched out before them, pale and endless. Brennan stopped at the edge. "This is where you wanted to go?" he asked, voice low. Cale stepped onto the ice. No hesitation. The dog's weight shifted carefully, paws spreading slightly for balance. His movements were practiced, not reckless, not curious. Familiar. Brennan watched him, something tightening again in his chest. "You've done this before," he said under his breath. Kyle continued forward, stopping after several yards. Then he turned and waited. Brennan exhaled sharply, then stepped onto the ice. It held. Of course it held. He knew this lake, knew its thickness, its patterns, the way it froze. He had crossed it dozens of times. So why did it feel different now? Each step echoed faintly beneath him, the sound traveling through layers of ice like a distant memory trying to surface. Kyle lowered his head, sniffing. He circled once, twice, then stopped, not with certainty, with hesitation. Brennan noticed immediately. "You don't know either, do you?" Cale's ears twitched. His nose hovered just above the ice, then lifted slightly, as if something was there, but not where it should be. Brennan stepped closer. "Show me." Cale pawed once at the surface. The ice cracked, not breaking, just shifting, revealing a thin layer of packed snow and something darker beneath. Brennan knelt, brushing the snow aside with gloved hands. Metal, dull, partially frozen into place. His breath slowed. "That's not debris," he murmured. Cale stepped back, giving space. Brennan cleared more snow, revealing the edges of a small container, military grade, the kind designed to survive impact, water, time, and war. The latch was bound with paracord, not loosely, deliberately. The knot wasn't random. It was precise, efficient, familiar. Brennan's fingers paused. "No," he whispered. But his hand moved anyway. He pulled the knife from his pocket, cutting through the frozen cord, then pried the latch open. The lid resisted at first, ice holding it shut, then gave way with a dull crack. Inside, paper, several sheets, folded, stacked, protected from the elements. Brennan stared down at them, his chest tightening again, not with fear this time, but with something heavier. Recognition. He picked one up. The paper was aged, but not destroyed. The ink had bled slightly at the edges, but the writing remained. Tight, controlled, unmistakable. Silas. Brennan didn't say the name out loud. He didn't need to. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the first letter. "I don't know if this will ever reach you. Maybe that's the point. If you're reading it, then something went wrong." The sentence ended abruptly. No signature, no date. Brennan swallowed, reaching for another. "I'm not where they think I am. But I don't think it matters anymore. They're not looking for me to find me. They're looking to make sure I don't exist." Again, unfinished. Every letter stopped before it could say too much, before it could become dangerous. Brennan's breathing grew slower, heavier. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. Cale shifted slightly behind him, watching. Not pushing, just present. Brennan unfolded another page. This one was shorter, more direct. "Brennan, If you still believe what they told you, then you're still under it. The last word trailed off. The ink smeared slightly, as if the writer had been interrupted, or had stopped himself. Brennan stared at the line for a long time. Wind moved across the lake, lifting fine snow into the air, brushing against his coat in quiet waves. He didn't feel it. His mind had already gone somewhere else. Back, to that mission, to the moment everything had gone wrong. Gunfire. Static in his earpiece. A voice, Silas's voice, cutting through the chaos. And then, nothing. A gap. A space where memory should have been. He had always accepted that. Combat did that. Trauma erased details. That was normal. That was explainable. But now, his fingers tightened around the paper. What if it wasn't? Kyl's head lifted slightly, not reacting to the words, reacting to the shift. A sudden sound cracked through the ice beneath them, sharp, clean. Brennan froze. The surface didn't break, but something moved underneath. Not water, not shifting pressure. Something displaced. Kyle stepped back instantly, muscles tensing, ears forward, gaze locked on the exact spot beneath Brennan's knees. Not afraid, focused, like he recognized the signal. Brennan slowly lowered his hand toward the ice again, and for a split second, he thought he saw something beneath it. Not clearly, just a shadow, a shape that didn't belong. Gone as quickly as it appeared. The lake returned to stillness, but Kyle didn't relax. Neither did Brennan, because whatever had just moved, it hadn't felt like the lake. It had felt like something remembering. Brennan exhaled slowly, forcing his focus back to the box, to the letters, to something he could hold. "This is real," he said quietly. Not to Kyle, to himself. He gathered the papers carefully, placing them back into the container, but not sealing it. Not hiding it again. Not this time. Kyle circled once more, sniffing the air, then the ice. But something had changed. His movements were no longer precise. They were uncertain. He paused, tilted his head slightly, then shifted direction. Once, twice, as if the scent he had followed had faded or split. Brennan noticed. "You lost it." Kyle didn't respond, didn't correct. He simply stood there, looking out across the lake. Not toward one point, but many. Brennan followed his gaze. For the first time, the lake didn't feel empty. It felt layered. Like something had happened here more than once. Like this wasn't the first place something had been left behind. Brennan stood slowly, the metal box in his hands heavier than it should have been. Not because of its weight, because of what it meant. He looked down at Kale. The dog met his gaze. No urgency, no command. Just presence. The choice wasn't being made for him. Not anymore. Brennan turned back toward the shore. One step, then another. The ice held, the wind followed, and behind him, Kale remained still for a moment longer, then turned and followed. But not closely, not tightly. There was space now, between them. Not distance, just space. The kind that only appears when something unspoken has already begun to change. The lake no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a beginning Brennan hadn't agreed to. By the time he reached the cabin, the metal box had already changed something in him. It wasn't the letters alone. It was the weight of them. The fact that they existed at all. He hadn't slept much. Not really. The fire had burned low through the night while Brennan sat at the table. The letters spread out in uneven lines. He hadn't read all of them. Not yet. Something in him resisted finishing them, as if once he reached the last page there would be no more room left to pretend. Kyle hadn't slept either. The German shepherd lay near the door, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but never fully. Every so often, his ears would twitch toward the outside, listening, waiting. By morning, Brennan made a decision. Not a clean one, not a confident one, but a direction. There was only one person in this town who might know something about the lake beyond what it looked like. Noah Pike. Noah's place sat about a mile down the shoreline, tucked between a line of wind-bent pines and an old wooden dock that had long since lost its purpose. The cabin was smaller than Brennan's, older too, the wood darkened by years of exposure. Smoke drifted lazily from a metal chimney. Kyle slowed as they approached. Not afraid. Alert. Brennan noticed. "You've been here before," he murmured. Kyle didn't answer, but his posture shifted. Weight slightly forward, nose working the air. Brennan knocked once on the door. It opened before he could knock again. Noah Pike stood there, already watching him. 60 years old, maybe a little more. His frame was lean, but still carried the kind of strength that didn't fade easily. His face was carved with deep lines, not soft ones, not the kind earned from laughter. These were lines shaped by weather, silence, and time. His hair had gone mostly gray, uneven, falling just past his ears, and a rough layer of stubble shadowed his jaw. His eyes were the most noticeable thing about him. Dark, steady, the kind of eyes that didn't ask questions unless they already knew the answer. "You're late," Noah said. Brennan frowned slightly. "Late for what?" Noah's gaze shifted briefly to Cale, then back to Brennan. "For deciding to come here." There was no accusation in his voice, just fact. Brennan exhaled slowly. "Can I come in?" Noah stepped aside without another word. The inside of the cabin smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. Everything was simple, functional. Tools hung neatly along one wall, boots lined up near the door, a small table positioned near a window overlooking the lake. No unnecessary objects, no wasted space. Brennan recognized the type immediately, a man who kept only what he needed and nothing he couldn't carry. Noah poured coffee into a chipped mug and set it on the table without asking. Brennan didn't drink it. He placed the metal box down instead. The sound of it against the wood was louder than it should have been. Noah's eyes dropped to it. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, "You found it." Not a question. Brennan felt something tighten again. "You knew it was there." Noah leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. "I knew where I left it." "Why?" Noah didn't answer immediately. His gaze shifted toward the window, toward the lake beyond it, then back. "Because someone asked me to." Brennan's jaw tightened. "Who?" Noah studied him for a second. Not suspicious, not defensive. Measuring. "A man who didn't want to be found," he said finally. "That narrows it down." Noah almost smiled. Almost. "He came in late winter, 6 years ago, maybe a little more. Wounded. Not the kind you patch up with a bandage. Brennan's chest tightened. What kind, then? Noah's expression didn't change. The kind that doesn't stop bleeding just because the skin closes. That was enough. Brennan didn't need more detail. He knew that kind of wound. Did he give you a name? No. Did you ask? Noah shrugged slightly. Didn't seem like my place. Brennan let out a quiet breath, running a hand along the edge of the table. But you helped him. I gave him a place to sit, Noah said. And I listened when he spoke. That's not the same thing. Brennan looked at the box again. He left this with you. Noah nodded. Told me to put it somewhere it wouldn't be found by accident. And you chose the lake. I chose a place where only someone who knew where to look would find it. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. Cale moved, slowly. He stepped away from the door and circled once around the room, nose low, tracing something Brennan couldn't see. Then he stopped, right beside Noah. The old man didn't flinch, didn't reach out. Just stood still as Cale lifted his head, studying him. Not aggressive, not friendly, recognizing. Noah's eyes softened, just slightly. I remember you, he said under his breath. Brennan's head snapped up. What? Noah didn't look at him. He was still watching Cale. You were with him, Noah continued quietly. Cale didn't move, didn't confirm, didn't deny. But something in his stillness felt different. Noah reached into a drawer and pulled out a small object, wrapped in cloth. He placed it gently on the table and unfolded it. Inside, a worn leather tag. Dark brown, edges cracked with age. Stamped into it, barely visible. K-17. Kyle stepped forward instantly. Not cautious this time. Certain. He lowered his head, pressing his nose lightly against the tag, then froze. Completely. As if something inside him had just aligned. Brennan felt his pulse spike. What is that? Noah looked at him. That's what he called him. Brennan's voice dropped. That's not his name. No, Noah said softly. It's what he was before he had one. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Not physically, but in the way understanding shifts when something small suddenly matters too much. Cale lifted his head slowly, and for the first time since Brennan had known him, he looked uncertain. Brennan stared at the tag, then at Cale. You were his. It wasn't a question. Cale didn't move, didn't deny it, didn't confirm it. But Brennan didn't need him to. Something in his chest tightened again, this time sharper, more personal. Why didn't I know that? Noah's voice came quietly. Maybe you weren't supposed to. Brennan shook his head slightly. No, that's not how this works. We would have known, You don't know what you would have known, Noah cut in. Not harsh, just firm. Silence followed. Brennan looked away first. He said something else, Noah added after a moment. Brennan's head turned back. What? Noah's gaze returned to the lake. He said if anyone ever came asking about him. He paused, choosing his words carefully. That person wouldn't be looking for him. Brennan frowned. What does that mean? Noah met his eyes again. It means they'd be looking for themselves. The words settled deeper than Brennan expected. He didn't respond, didn't argue, because somewhere beneath the confusion, beneath the resistance, they made sense. Too much sense. Brennan picked up the metal box again. His grip was steadier now, not because he understood, but because he had stopped trying to push it away. "I need to see where he stayed," he said. Noah studied him for a long second, then nodded once. "Follow the ridge past the north tree line. You'll find it." Kyle had already moved toward the door, but this time, he didn't go straight. He paused, looked back, as if asking something. Not of Brennan, of himself. The forest swallowed sound differently than the lake. Where the lake had been open, exposed, the forest closed in around them, branches heavy with snow, trunks thick and silent. Kyle led, but not the way he had before. His path wasn't clean. He slowed often, paused, adjusted. Once he stopped completely, turning in a small circle before choosing a direction. Brennan noticed every hesitation, every break in certainty. "You don't remember," he said quietly. Kyle didn't respond, but he didn't correct the path either. The cabin appeared suddenly, half hidden between trees, its structure worn but intact. The door hung slightly off its hinge, and one window had been boarded from the inside. Brennan approached slowly. Every instinct told him this place mattered. He pushed the door open. It creaked. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Trapped, stale. There were signs of life. Not recent, but not abandoned either. A blanket folded neatly on a narrow cot. A tin cup left beside a makeshift stove. And on the far wall, a line carved into the wood. Not deeply, but intentionally. Brennan stepped closer. His breath slowed. The words were simple, rough, uneven, but unmistakable. "You didn't forget. You chose not to remember." Brennan stood there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, because for the first time, the question wasn't whether something had been hidden from him. The question was what he had hidden from himself. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. Kyle sat just beyond the doorway, not watching the forest, not watching the path, watching Brennan. Waiting. And this time, Brennan didn't look away. The road into town curved like a memory Brennan hadn't walked in years. It wasn't far, just under 30 minutes by truck. But distance had never been measured in miles for him. It was measured in what he chose not to revisit. The clinic sat at the edge of town, a low, modern building tucked between a pharmacy and a shuttered diner. Clean lines, frosted windows, the kind of place that looked neutral on purpose. Safe. Brennan parked but didn't get out immediately. Kyle sat in the passenger seat, body still, eyes forward. He didn't react to the town, the cars, the distant movement of people going about ordinary lives. But his ears twitched once, twice, tracking sound, mapping space. Brennan glanced at him. "You remember this place?" Kyle didn't answer, but he didn't relax either. That was enough. Dr. Helena Sloan hadn't changed as much as Brennan expected. She stood near the reception desk when he entered. Tall, composed, her posture straight in a way that suggested discipline rather than comfort. Around 42, her build was slender but firm, as if she had trained herself to carry tension without showing it. Her hair, once a clean blonde, now carried faint streaks of gray, tied back neatly at the nape of her neck. Her face was angular, controlled, with high cheekbones and pale skin that had never fully adapted to the Montana cold. But her eyes, sharp, observant, the kind that didn't just look at you, they evaluated. She recognized him immediately. There was no hesitation, no confusion, just a quiet shift in her expression. Brennan, no surprise, no welcome, just acknowledgement. He nodded once. Doctor. Her gaze flicked briefly to Kyle, who stood just inside the doorway, calm but alert. You brought him this time, she said. I didn't leave him. That seemed to register, not as a statement, as a detail. Helena gestured toward the back hallway. Come with me. Her office was unchanged. Minimal furniture, neutral tones, a single window overlooking a narrow strip of snow-covered grass. No personal items on display, no photographs, no signs of a life beyond the work done inside these walls. Brennan sat. Kyle remained near the door, watching everything. Helena didn't sit immediately. She studied Brennan for a long moment, her eyes moving subtly, face, posture, hands. You're not here for routine, she said finally. No. You haven't been for 3 years. I know. Silence, then. What changed? Brennan reached into his jacket and pulled out one of the letters. Not the first one. Not the one that had broken something open. A different one. He placed it on the desk. Helena didn't touch it. Not yet. Read it, Brennan said. She looked at him instead. You want me to confirm something or deny it? Just read it. She picked up the paper carefully. Her eyes moved across the lines once, then again. Slower. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Recognition. Not of the content, of the implication. She set the paper down. Where did you find this? That's not the question. It is if you want a useful answer. Brennan leaned forward slightly. I want a true one. Helena held his gaze, unblinking. You were injured, she said. Severe trauma, blood loss, disorientation. You were unconscious for a period of time. I know the report. Then you know memory distortion is common under those conditions. This isn't distortion. Helena's expression didn't change. What do you think it is? Brennan exhaled slowly, jaw tightening. I think I've been living with a version of events that isn't complete. Helena tilted her head slightly. Incomplete doesn't mean false. It means missing. And sometimes, she said quietly, missing is what allows a person to keep functioning. That landed harder than he expected. Brennan leaned back slightly, running a hand along his jaw. You knew, he said. It wasn't a question. Helena didn't deny it. I knew what was necessary, she replied. For who? For you. Brennan let out a short, humorless breath. That's convenient. No, she said calmly. It's clinical. Kyle shifted slightly near the door. Not restless, but attentive. Helena's eyes flicked toward him again. He's reacting differently, she observed. Brennan didn't look back. He's always been like this. No, Helena said softly. He hasn't. That made Brennan pause. Helena stood, walking slowly toward a locked cabinet against the wall. She opened it, retrieving a thin file. Not thick, not detailed, but deliberate. She placed it on the desk. "I didn't alter your memory," she said. "I stabilized it." Brennan frowned. "That's not the same thing." "It's not," she agreed, "but it leads to the same outcome." She opened the file. Inside were notes, clinical observations, timestamps, fragmented entries that didn't read like a story. They read like containment. "You were conscious when you arrived," she continued. "Disoriented, but aware. You repeated certain details consistently." "Which details?" Helena looked at him. "You insisted that the mission had gone as expected, that losses were unavoidable, that decisions had been made correctly." Brennan swallowed. "That's what happened." Helena didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned the file toward him. "Read the third entry." He did. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. "Subject exhibits resistance when prompted about secondary extraction protocol. Avoidance response noted when referencing team member creed. Recommendation: do not reinforce conflicting recall at this stage." Brennan's grip on the paper tightened. "What does that mean?" Helena's voice remained steady. "It means you were presented with something you did not accept. I would remember that. Not if you chose not to." KL suddenly moved, not toward the door, toward the desk. He stepped forward with purpose, placing one paw lightly against the edge, his gaze fixed not on Brennan, but on the open file. Helena froze. Brennan looked up. Kale's nose lowered, hovering just above a specific line in the document. Not randomly, precisely. Brennan followed the motion, his eyes locking onto the line Kyle had stopped at. Subject cleared for directive compliance prior to loss of consciousness. The room seemed to shrink, not physically, but in the way space collapses when a single sentence becomes too large to ignore. Brennan's voice dropped. "What directive?" Helena didn't answer. Not right away. Because she didn't need to. Brennan already knew. He just hadn't said it out loud yet. Brennan stood abruptly, pushing the chair back. "You're telling me I agreed to something?" Helena remained seated, her posture unchanged. "I'm telling you that decisions were made before you lost consciousness." "That's not what I asked." "No," she said quietly. "It's what you're avoiding." Brennan's chest rose and fell once, sharply. "What was the directive?" Helena held his gaze, long enough for the silence to become an answer. "Containment," she said. The word felt sterile, clinical, but Brennan heard what it meant. "Containment of what?" Helena didn't blink. "Information." The pieces didn't fall into place. They shifted, unsettling, rearranging. Because Brennan had always believed the mission had failed due to external factors. Enemy movement, terrain, timing. Now, there was something else, and something internal, something chosen. "You're saying someone needed to be left behind," Brennan said slowly. Helena didn't confirm, didn't deny. "I'm saying," she replied, "that the situation required prioritization." That's not an answer. It's the only one that remains intact. Brennan laughed once, short, sharp, without humor. "Intact for who?" Helena's voice softened slightly. "For the version of you that needed to survive." Brennan turned away, pacing once across the room. Kyle stepped back, giving him space, not interfering, not calming, just present. "Who gave the order?" Brennan asked finally. Helena's eyes held his. There was no hesitation this time, no calculation, just decision. "Colonel Armitage Cole." The name landed differently than Brennan expected. Not like a shock, more like something long buried, finally reaching the surface. Brennan stopped moving. "Cole was command," he said. "Yes." "He wasn't on the ground." "No." "Then how?" "He had the authority." "That doesn't mean—" "It means," Helena interrupted quietly, "that he made a decision based on the information available to him. And I agreed to it." Helena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Brennan stood there for a long moment. Not angry. Not yet. Just recalibrating. Because if that was true, then the story he had been living with for years wasn't a lie. It was worse. It was incomplete in a way that protected him from himself. He picked up the letter again, looked at it, then folded it carefully. Not dismissing it. Not denying it. Holding it. "I didn't come here for permission," he said quietly. Helena nodded. "I know. I came here to see if I was wrong." "And?" Brennan met her eyes. "I don't know yet." He turned toward the door. Cale moved immediately, falling into step beside him. Not ahead. Not behind. Beside. At the threshold, Brennan paused, not turning back. Just stopping. "For what it's worth," Helena said softly behind him, "you did survive." Brennan's hand tightened slightly on the doorframe. "Yeah," he replied, then stepped outside. The cold hit him again, but it felt different now. Sharper, clearer, like something had been stripped away. Kyle walked beside him as they returned to the truck. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just movement. Brennan didn't look back at the clinic. Didn't need to, because the truth wasn't there. It had never been. It had always been somewhere between what he remembered and what he had chosen not to. The drive back from town felt longer than it should have. Not because of distance, because of weight. Brennan Voss drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the gear shift, fingers tapping once, then stopping as if even small movements now required permission. The road curved along the edge of the forest, snow packed into tire grooves, the world reduced to quiet whites and muted shadows. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but nothing felt the same. Kyle sat in the passenger seat, posture upright, eyes forward. He didn't scan the road like before, didn't track movement, didn't react to passing trees or distant birds. He was waiting, not for instruction, for something else. Brennan glanced at him briefly. "You knew," he said quietly. Kyle didn't turn, didn't acknowledge, but his ears shifted slightly, just enough. Brennan looked back at the road. "Yeah," he muttered. "You always do." The moment lingered, stretching like a quiet understanding neither of them fully owned. By the time they reached the cabin, the light had already begun to thin. The sky over the lake stretched pale and cold, a soft gray fading into blue. Brennan didn't go inside. Not immediately. Instead, he stood by the edge of the lake again, hands in his pockets, staring out across the ice. Helena's words hadn't settled. They had rearranged things, subtly, dangerously, not erased, not replaced, just shifted. He had agreed. That was the part he couldn't push away, no matter how much he wanted to. He had agreed. "You don't remember," he said under his breath. Kale stepped forward beside him, not leading, not guiding, just present. Brennan turned toward the ridgeline beyond the lake, the forest, the cabin they had found, the place where Silas had been, or had tried to be. His jaw tightened. "Let's go." This time there was no hesitation. The forest felt different in fading light. Colder, quieter, less forgiving. Branches creaked under the weight of snow, and each step carried further than it should have, as if the trees themselves were listening. Kyle moved ahead, but not with the certainty of before. His path wasn't straight. It curved, paused, adjusted. Sometimes he would stop entirely, standing still for several seconds before choosing a direction. Brennan noticed every shift. "You're not tracking a path," he said quietly. Kale didn't look back. "You're remembering one." That felt closer to the truth, and that made it worse. The cabin appeared again, half hidden in shadow, unchanged, but not untouched. Brennan stopped just outside the door. Something was different. He couldn't see it immediately, couldn't name it, but it was there. Kyle noticed it first. His posture stiffened, not aggressive, but alert in a way that carried weight. His nose lifted slightly, scenting the air. Not confusion, recognition, but layered with something else. Caution. Brennan stepped forward slowly, pushing the door open. It creaked the same way it had before, but inside the air felt disturbed, subtly, like something had moved through it recently. Not enough to leave obvious signs, but enough that it wasn't still anymore. Brennan's eyes scanned the room. The cot, the blanket, the tin cup, all in place but slightly off. A fraction shifted, a detail too small to matter. Except it did. "You see it too," he murmured. Kyle stepped inside. Slow, deliberate. He moved toward the far wall, then stopped, not at the carved words they had seen before. Below them, closer to the floor. He lowered his head, sniffed once, then pawed lightly at the wooden planks. Brennan's eyes narrowed. "There's something there." He moved quickly, kneeling beside Kyle, running his fingers along the floor. One plank felt different, looser, not by much, but enough. He pulled his knife, wedging it into the edge, applying pressure until the wood lifted with a quiet snap. Beneath it, a narrow cavity. Hidden, intentional. Brennan reached inside. His fingers closed around something solid. Plastic. Cold. He pulled it out. A small recording device. Old. Military issue. Compact. Durable. Designed to survive environments most things couldn't. His pulse slowed. Not racing. Settling. As if something he had expected, but never allowed himself to fully believe, had finally taken shape. Kyle stepped back, watching. Not interfering. Not reacting. waiting. Brennan turned the device over in his hand. There was a scratch along the side. Faint, but familiar. He had seen it before. Not here. Not like this. But somewhere else, somewhen else. His thumb hovered over the button, paused, then pressed. Static, soft, uneven. Then a breath. Not Brennan's, not the wind. A voice, low, controlled, but worn. I don't know if this is going to be the one that lasts. The voice didn't sound distant. It sounded close, too close, as if it hadn't traveled through time, but had been waiting. Brennan's grip tightened slightly. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just listened. I figured if I kept talking, one of these would make it through. A pause, a shift in breath. Then, I know you're going to hear this eventually. Brennan's jaw locked, because he recognized it. Not just the voice, the tone, the cadence, the way certain words carried weight while others didn't. Silas. And I know what they told you. A faint sound in the background, movement, maybe fabric, maybe something being set down. I don't blame you for what you did. Brennan exhaled slowly. Not relief, not pain. Something in between, then, I blame you for pretending you didn't. The recording cut for a second. Static filled the space, then resumed. You were awake, Brennan. The words landed differently, sharper, more precise. You heard the call. Brennan's chest tightened. You agreed. The device clicked softly as the recording ended. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It had shape now. Wait. Brennan lowered the recorder slowly. His eyes remained fixed on it, as if looking away would undo what he had just heard. Kyle didn't move, didn't approach. He simply watched. Not with expectation, with recognition. You were awake. Brennan repeated it quietly, not questioning, confirming. Because something inside him had shifted again, not broken, aligned, in a way that hurt more. Memory didn't return all at once. It didn't flood in. It edged forward. Fragments. A voice in his earpiece. Command. Urgent. Clear. A decision point. Not confusion. Not chaos, choice. Brennan closed his eyes briefly. Just for a second. Then opened them again. Clearer. Colder. More precise. I remember the moment before, he said. Not to Kyle, to the space around him. I remember the call coming in. His grip on the recorder tightened. I remember understanding what it meant. Kyle's ears shifted slightly, listening. They didn't take it from me, Brennan said. They just didn't stop me from letting it go. He looked at the carved words on the wall again. This time, they didn't feel like a message. They felt like a record. Brennan exhaled once, steady, then turned toward the door, the recorder still in his hand. Kyle followed. Closer this time. Not guiding, not waiting. Walking with him. Outside, the forest had darkened, the last light fading behind the trees. The path back wasn't clear, but Brennan didn't hesitate. He didn't look back at the cabin. Didn't need to. Because what he had come for was no longer there. It was here now. With him. And for the first time, he didn't try to push it away. Night settled over the forest like something deliberate. Not sudden, not violent, just inevitable. Brennan Voss moved through it without hesitation. The path ahead wasn't marked, but something inside him had changed. Not instinct, not memory alone. Recognition. The kind that didn't come from knowing where to go, but from finally understanding why you were going. Kyle stayed close now. Not ahead. Not searching. Beside. The German shepherd's movements were quieter than before. Each step measured. His body aligned with Brennan's pace rather than guiding it. His ears shifted constantly, catching distant sounds, mapping space in ways Brennan no longer questioned. The forest thinned slightly as they moved deeper along the ridge. Then Cale stopped. Not abruptly, decisively. Brennan halted beside him, eyes scanning ahead. At first, there was nothing. Just trees, snow, darkness layered in shadow. Then a shape, low, almost swallowed by the earth itself. A hatch. Metal partially buried under frozen soil and packed snow, its edges concealed by time and intention, rather than nature alone. Brennan exhaled slowly. This is it. Cale didn't move, didn't approach, but his body tensed. Not with fear, but with something heavier. Expectation. Brennan pulled at the hatch. It resisted. Not locked. Just sealed by time. He dug his fingers into the edge, using his knife to break the frozen seal, then lifted. It gave with a dull scrape. Cold air rose from the darkness below. Not fresh, not stale. Something in between. Unused. Waiting. Brennan dropped down first, boots landing softly against packed dirt. Kyle followed immediately, silent and fluid. The underground space was small, functional, temporary. A place meant for survival, not comfort. A narrow cot lined one wall. A folding table stood in the center, cluttered with scattered items such as maps, empty ration wrappers, and a broken flashlight. And against the far wall, there was a device, mounted, facing outward. Brennan approached it slowly. A video unit. Older model, military grade, still intact. His chest tightened slightly. He left this, Brennan murmured. Kyle stood just behind him, still, focused. Brennan reached forward and pressed the power switch. The screen flickered. Static. Then an image appeared. Silas Creed. Not as Brennan remembered him. Thinner. The angles of his face sharper, the softness gone. His hair, once tightly kept, had grown uneven. His eyes, still gray, held something heavier now. Not fear, not anger, acceptance. He sat in this very space. The same wall behind him, the same dim light. Only now time separated them. Silas leaned slightly forward, not addressing the camera, addressing Brennan. I don't have a lot of time to get this right. His voice was quieter than in the recording, more grounded, like he wasn't running anymore. If you're watching this, then you made it far enough. A pause. He exhaled once. That's something. Brennan didn't move, didn't blink. He watched. Every detail. Every shift. I'm not dead, Silas said simply. The words did not shock Brennan. They landed like something already known, finally spoken aloud. I made it out. Silas glanced slightly off camera for a moment, as if checking something, then back. Not because of what happened that day. Another pause. In spite of it. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. I understand why you said yes. Silas continued, his voice steady. No hesitation, no accusation. You heard the situation. You saw the risk. His gaze did not waver. You made the call you were trained to make. Brennan's chest tightened again, but this time there was no resistance. Silas leaned back slightly. That's not what stayed with me. Silence followed. Then he continued. What stayed with me was how easy it was for you to believe it was over. The words settled heavily, not loud, not sharp, but precise. A sudden sound echoed above. Footsteps. Muted. Careful but real. Kyle reacted instantly. Not barking, not charging. His body lowered, muscles tightening, ears locked toward the sound. Brennan did not turn. Not yet. His eyes remained fixed on the screen. On Silas. Because whatever was coming, this mattered more. For now. Silas continued. I stayed because I had to. He gestured slightly around him. There were things tied to that mission that weren't supposed to surface. A faint smile touched his lips. Not humor. Understanding. And if I walked back in, they would have buried it deeper. Brennan's fingers curled slightly at his samphong. So I stayed gone. Silas met the camera directly. Not because I couldn't come back. A pause. Because I chose not to. Above them, the sound shifted. Closer. More than one set of footsteps now. Kyle remained still, controlled, waiting. Silas leaned forward slightly. I forgave you a long time ago. The words came without hesitation, without weight. But that's not what you're here for. Brennan inhaled slowly. The air in the bunker felt thinner, heavier. You're here because you need to decide what to do with it. Silas reached slightly out of frame, then placed something down. A small data drive. Black. Unmarked. This is everything I couldn't leave behind. The footsteps above stopped. Silence. Then a faint metallic shift. Kyle moved slightly closer to Brennan. Aligned. Silas's voice softened. You don't need to tell the whole story. A pause. But don't pretend there wasn't one. The screen flickered, then went dark. The bunker fell silent. Not empty. Charged. Brennan turned slowly. This time he looked up. The hatch shifted. Not fully open. Just enough for a shadow to fall across the opening. Then a figure dropped down, followed by another. 2 men. Both in dark tactical gear. No visible insignia. The first was tall and broad-shouldered, with stubble lining his jaw and sharp, calculating eyes. The second was leaner and younger, his movements tighter and more controlled. Neither rushed, neither hesitated. You've gone far enough, the first man said. His voice was calm, measured, like someone used to being obeyed. Brennan didn't step back, didn't reach for anything. He simply stood. Kyle shifted slightly. Positioning. Ready. "This doesn't need to go further," the second man added, less confident, more rehearsed. Brennan glanced briefly at the table, at the data drive, then back at them. "No," he said quietly. "It already has." The first man tilted his head slightly. "Then you know what happens next." Brennan did. Not because they told him, because he had lived inside that system before. Containment. Kyle moved first. Not aggressively, precisely. Intercepting the space between Brennan and the men. Not attacking, preventing. The tension snapped. Movement. Fast. Controlled. A struggle, but not chaotic. Measured. Each motion calculated. Kyle forced distance. Brennan stepped back just enough, not retreating. Positioning. No victory. No clean outcome. Just interruption, seconds stretched, then broke. The men withdrew, not defeated, not finished, but stopped. For now. Silence returned. Heavier. Brennan looked at the data drive again, then at the hatch, then at Kyle. He could end it here, erase it, let it sink back into the ground, or he could release it. All of it. Every detail. Every consequence. Brennan exhaled slowly, then reached down, picked up the drive. But not everything. He left the rest. The maps, the notes, the pieces that would unravel more than they would repair. Brennan turned toward the hatch. "We're done here," he said quietly. Kyle followed. Not ahead, not behind. Beside. Above, the night remained unchanged. But Brennan did not see it the same way anymore. Because truth did not free him. It only gave him something to carry. And this time he chose how much. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, like something unsure of its welcome. The ice on the lake did not break in a single moment. It softened, shifted, cracked in long, silent lines that spread like veins beneath the surface. The world did not change its color. It simply began to breathe again. Brennan Voss noticed it in small things. The way the wind carried less bite. The way the snow beneath his boots gave slightly instead of resisting. The way the lake, once a mirror of stillness, now moved almost imperceptibly beneath its thinning shell. He stood at the edge of it again, not searching, not waiting, just standing. Kyle lay beside him, stretched across the damp ground, his thick black and tan coat catching flecks of melting frost. His body was relaxed in a way Brennan had not seen before, not alert, not poised for movement, at ease. Not because there was nothing left to do, because something had ended. The town had changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. A few weeks earlier, a story had surfaced. Not the full one. Never the full one. Just fragments. A report filed through channels that were not supposed to reopen. A quiet leak of information that raised questions no one had asked before. Names were not all revealed. Details were incomplete. But it was enough. Enough to make people look twice at things they had accepted too easily. Enough to unsettle, not enough to destroy. That had been Brennan's decision. Not to expose everything. Not to bury everything. something in between. A truth measured in weight rather than completeness. Dr. Helena Sloan remained in her office. Brennan had seen her once since that day. She had looked the same, composed and controlled, but there had been something different in her eyes. Less certainty. Not weakness. Awareness. She had not apologized. She had not defended herself. She had simply said, "You chose." And Brennan had nodded. Because she was right. Noah Pike had said nothing. Of course he had not. Brennan had passed by his cabin once, just after the first thaw began. Noah had been outside, splitting wood with the same steady rhythm as always. He had glanced up, met Brennan's eyes, then returned to his work. No questions, no acknowledgement. Just the quiet understanding of a man who had already accepted that some things did not need to be spoken aloud. Brennan had not gone back to the bunker. Not once. He did not need to, because the weight of it had followed him out. Not as a burden, as something else, something chosen. He worked more now, not to avoid thought, but to shape it. The old boat behind his cabin had been left unfinished for months. Its wooden frame had warped slightly over winter, the planks uneven, the joints strained. Now, Brennan repaired it. Slowly, carefully. Each movement deliberate, each decision intentional. Not fixing something broken, building something that could hold. Kyle no longer led. That was the most noticeable change. The German Shepherd still moved with awareness, still tracked sound, still reacted to shifts in the environment. But he did not guide, did not wait for Brennan to follow. He stayed close, not as a signal, as a presence. One afternoon, as the ice along the shoreline began to break apart in thin, drifting sheets, Brennan sat on the edge of the dock. The wood beneath him creaked softly, water lapping gently against its supports. Kyle lay beside him, head resting between his paws, eyes half closed. Brennan held the small black data drive in his hand. He had not used it again. Not since that night. Not because he was afraid of what it contained, because he already understood enough. He turned it once between his fingers, then slipped it back into his pocket. "You ever think about going back?" Brennan asked quietly. Kyle did not lift his head, did not react. The question was not meant for him. A breeze moved across the lake, carrying the scent of thawing earth. Brennan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Clear. Present. The sound came softly, paper against wood. Brennan frowned slightly, turning his head. Something had been left on the dock. He was sure it had not been there before. A small piece of folded paper, clean, dry, not weathered, not carried by wind, placed, deliberately. Kyle lifted his head slowly, not startled, not alarmed, aware. Brennan reached for the paper, his movements controlled but slower than they should have been. He unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar, not from memory alone, from something deeper. "You remembered." A pause in the line. "Then now you get to decide what that means." Brennan stared at the words. No signature, no mark, nothing to confirm what he already knew, because he did not need confirmation. He exhaled slowly, not in surprise, not in relief, in recognition. Kale stood, moved closer. Not to the paper. To Brennan. Brennan folded the note again. Carefully, deliberately. Then placed it in his pocket. Not hidden. Kept. He did not look out across the lake. Did not scan the tree line. Did not search for movement. Because that was not the point anymore. Somewhere, Silas Creed was alive. That was enough. And somewhere within Brennan, the version of himself that had made that decision still existed. The difference now was that he was not pretending otherwise. Brennan stood. The dock shifted slightly beneath his weight. Kyle moved with him naturally, without hesitation. Behind them, the unfinished boat rested on its supports. Waiting. Not abandoned. Just paused. Brennan walked toward it, picked up a tool, examined the frame, adjusted a joint, tightened a support. Each motion grounded. Present. Kyle lay down nearby, watching. Not guiding. Not expecting. Just there. The lake moved behind them, the ice breaking apart, drifting, dissolving into water that no longer held shape. Brennan did not turn to look. Not because he did not care. Because he did not need to. He knew it was there. And for the first time, he did not measure himself against it. The past had not disappeared. It had not been resolved. It had not been erased. It had been chosen. And now so had the man who carried it. Brennan Voss did not answer the question written on that paper. Not out loud. Not to anyone. He answered it here, in the quiet, in the work, in the decision to move forward without pretending the past had not shaped him. The boat would be ready soon. The lake would open. The road would lead somewhere new. And this time, Brennan would go. Not because he was running, because he was no longer staying behind. There are moments in life that don't arrive with thunder or light, but with quiet persistence. A dog that refuses to give up. A memory that refuses to disappear. A truth that waits patiently until a heart is ready to face it. Some people call that coincidence, but maybe it is something more. Maybe it is grace. Because sometimes God does not speak through words. He speaks through what stays, through what returns, through what gently refuses to be forgotten until it heals what is broken inside us. Brennan was not saved by escaping his past. He was saved by facing it and choosing to live differently afterward. And maybe that is the miracle we often overlook. Not that life becomes easier, but that we are given another chance to choose who we become. In your own life, there may be things you have buried, things you have avoided, things you have told yourself no longer matter. But if they return, again and again, maybe it is not to hurt you, maybe it is to free you, not from the past, but from the version of yourself that is still trapped inside it. So when that moment comes, when something small calls you back, do not turn away too quickly. Listen, because sometimes that is where God is waiting. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what part of this story stayed with you. And if you believe in stories that remind us we are not alone, subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you more. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and give you the strength to face whatever you need to face, with peace in your heart and hope in your path.